everybody, and welcome back to Welcome Grove Homestead. I'm in our feed room right now and I am mixing our own grain for our goats. It's a decision that actually I've been spending a lot of time on, doing research, doing a lot of math, trying to figure out how we can actually cut some costs here on the homestead, trying to find our happy medium that we can maintain. In a perfect world, I would be able to do organic, non-GMO feed and be able to afford it. But that's not the case right now. So at this point, I'm trying to find what I can do for the least amount of money and still be able to supply my goats with what they need. Back when we lived in California and we only had the 2 goats to feed, I could spend a little more money on their feed because I only had 2 goats to feed and they were small goats. Now I have big goats who are eating poundage per day per goat. Our previous mix is that they have been eating a Tucker Milling dairy goat pellet, which is actually a pretty good feed and it's really not that expensive and you're not wasting a lot of money on dust. I'm also mixing that with alfalfa pellets, which getting a little higher on the cost chart, but it's still not crazy expensive. Where the expense came was when I was buying calf manna. Now, calf manna is not an organic or a non-GMO feed, but it is a performance pellet and the goats were doing really well on it, but it's expensive. Here anyway, it was costing me $45 a bag and my grain mix is only lasting me maybe a couple weeks. So it's really not very sustainable to be paying that much for feed. So I started doing some research on how I can mix a feed myself and still meet the goats' needs and also put a little more money back in my wallet. Now, I did do some math on if I could do an organic non-GMO grain mix if I was just mixing it myself. And unfortunately, no, I can't do that. It was going to cost me even more than I was already paying for feed. So I was going to have to look at some maybe not quite what I want ingredients, but it's okay. It's just the phase of life that I'm at right now. So I did some research and there's lots of recipes online if you look for different grain mixes. And there was one that I picked that I was like, hey, I could save a good chunk of money if I did this mix. We do have a friend here locally that works for a feed company and it's what he does all day is he crunches numbers and he formulates feed mixes for farms. So I asked him, hey, if I use this recipe, is that good for my goats? Because especially with goats, you want to concern yourself with the calcium to phosphorus ratio. And the reason for that is that goats are prone to urinary calculi. Urinary calculi is where the goat's urinary tract will actually form crystals in the urine because they're not able to process all of the calcium and phosphorus in their feed. So they end up getting these crystals which can block their urethra. Now it is more of a problem in male goats, but if male goats get it, you know that those crystals are still occurring in the females. The only reason that they are not having the problem is because they have a larger urethra. I have an issue with feeding them a feed that would potentially even hurt my does because honestly, if they're not able to process it, why am I feeding it? So I did my research and this formula that I found online, I was like, hey, is this going to be a balanced calcium to phosphorus ratio? And he came back to me and he said, your calcium to phosphorus is okay, but your protein is too low if you use this recipe that you found online. And I was actually surprised because it's a fairly common recipe. Multiple sites have this recipe in sort of varying measurements, but most of them have the same ingredients. And it turns out that it's not enough protein for these goats to be producing so much milk. So I worked together with our friend and we created this new mix that is still going to be cheaper than buying all of those pre-mixed feeds. And hopefully the goats will like it because I have had issues where goats like one ingredient but don't like the other and so they eat around it and it just kind of throws off the balance of everything. So without further ado, here is my new mix. I don't yet know how well this feed is going to perform for me. I will be coming back and updating you guys, but I kind of want to share with you what I'm doing as I'm doing it because I got this big old barrel back here and I'm going to fill this sucker up with a bunch of feed. So easier to film it going in rather than, hey, here's the thing I did. So I did mix up a small amount. This is what it looks like. You can see the alfalfa pellets in there. There's barley and oats. But I'll tell you guys our ratios here in 1 second. And this is the mess that I have right now as I'm mixing everything. All the different bags of everything. So, probably starting from left to right, I'll name everything, but that is not necessarily the order in which I am mixing them. So back here we have crimped oats. This is alfalfa pellets. This one is rolled barley, cracked corn. These 2 bags are black oil sunflower seeds because this one's probably going to run out. And this is soybean meal. Soybean meal is going to provide that protein kick that we really need in our grain mix. The alternative route that you could go to add more protein is that you can do field peas. They are a legume, they're high in protein, but you would have to mix a lot of field peas into the feed to get the same percentage of protein that I am getting with just using a soybean meal. So at least where I am, it's not really an option. It's just too expensive for me to get peas and then have to mix in such a high ratio of them, which means I'd be going through a bag faster, which means I would be spending more money. So if we ever get to a point where the homestead is sustaining itself financially and we have a little bit more expendable income that we can pour back into feed for the animals, then I absolutely look into switching up things into a more organic and non-GMO mix. But because we're not there yet, we just had to go with what is affordable. And this new mix is more affordable. Alright, now check out just how nerdy I am, guys. I have a food scale back here because this is my first time mixing it. I'm being extra careful. I just don't want to have our ratios off, or I really just want to know how far each bag is going to stretch me for each time that I mix this, because honestly, because there's different ratios, each of these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these bags are 50-pound bags. The other 2, the sunflower seeds, are actually a 40-pound bag. But because you're mixing things in different ratios, they're going to last a certain amount of batches, basically. Now the question is, how am I mixing this? I don't have a grain mixer, or I don't have fancy equipment. So I'm doing it basically in small batches and mixing it by hand at this point. Eventually I will probably use some tools. David actually has a cement mixer attachment that you can put on the drill, but because I'm being so meticulous and careful, I'm mixing it by hand this time around just because I want to make sure it all gets mixed, and that means running my hands through the entire mix. Now what I am doing is I'm actually using one of these little co-op feed scoops. It holds about 2 pounds in a scoop, but it really depends on the starting weight of your ingredient, such as like the oats are going to weigh less in a full scoop of this than the alfalfa pellets. So that's where the food scale comes in. So I know exactly kind of what the scoopage is, and then I go from there. So here is the composition of my feed. We have 35% rolled barley. We have 35% alfalfa pellets. We have 10% cracked corn and 10% crimped oats. And then 6% of it is soybean meal, and 4% of it is the sunflower seeds. And everyone's probably thinking, percentage, what does that mean in poundage? I've done that math too. Basically, with percentages, that is calculated per 100 pounds of feed. So, in 100 pounds of feed, 35 pounds of it is your rolled barley. 35% of it is the alfalfa pellets. Because I'm working with 50-pound bags, I would rather just use my 50-pound bags for a batch, because I don't want to have to overlap my main ingredients. So I've did some math and figured out, okay, if I take a 50-pound bag of rolled barley, that is 35% of what poundage? And that actually comes out to 142.86 pounds. So you kind of just do some more math and you get a breakdown of how much of each ingredient you need per batch of feed that's going to make about 142.86 pounds. So what I did is I further broke it down so that I could do it by the scoops and know exactly how many scoops I would really need so that I can mix it as I go up the barrel and be able to get a nice even consistency throughout. Hey, shout out to my fellow nerds. I do tare the weight of my empty scoop first. And that means to zero out the scale so that whatever is in the scoop it gets weighed, not the weight of the scoop plus the feed. So definitely a little bit of a tedious project for our first time here mixing the feed, but I just want to be extra super careful because I've never done this before. I'm definitely going to probably get a little bit more relaxed as I do it more, get a feel for how much each scoop really is. Because each thing weighs different amounts, I really want to be careful. So I'm going to finish getting this mixed up and we'll see just how full this barrel is.
Well, honey, you have a crowd here that's very interested
I do.
in a sample. This is like Costco.
Waiting in line?
Yes, you need a red checkered cloth to see, but let's take a look at that one more time.
I've just finished mixing our first batch.
That is so pretty.
Right?
All right. Moment of truth.
Oh boy. Miss Clover. She's herd queen. Nobody dare rush her.
He's like, oh yes. Oh.
They seem excited about it.
Yep.
Now, I'm only giving them a little taste right now. I am not just going to cold turkey switch them over to this new grain because that would be introducing a huge potential for bloat, which is not good. So we're going to start by kind of mixing it in with their old ration until their bodies get used to digesting that particular kind of grain, and then they'll switch over.
And how long will that take?
As long as I have the old grain.
What are you thinking, like a week, 2 weeks?
Probably about a week.
Nice.
Although if I'm diluting their old grain, it may take closer to a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks.
Well, that's fine. A couple weeks. Within a couple weeks is a good transition period.
Yeah.
You don't want to go all cold turkey in one day.
That's right.
You have a friend there.
I do. Hi, Clover. I know. Hi, sweetie. Oh.
All the love is mine.
Yeah.
Go away.
And then she comes back.
More love for me.
Now I do want to put a disclaimer out there. Just because there is corn in this mix does not automatically mean that they're going to bloat. Corn has a little bit of a stigma in that people think that corn automatically makes goats bloat. That's not the case. The case is that it's a sudden influx of an unfamiliar grain or too much of any given grain. So I mean, they could bloat on a bag of barley, they could bloat on a bag of oats, they can just any major shock to their system is going to cause bloat because it's going to create gas in their rumen, and that's where you run into problems. So if they have a small amount of corn in their mix, it's fine. There are some people who will feed straight cracked corn to their goats. It's fine as long as they are introduced to it and used to it.
I think it's important to make sure you always say no to crack. Maybe we should make a note of that. We at Welcome Grove Homestead do not advise crack for your goats.
Well, the taste test at least is a huge success. Now,
Want to see my favorite goat?
ew.
That's how goats eat. Is it not attractive on a human?
No.
Sorry.
Nasty.
As you were.
Nasty. Anyway, so over time we will see how they perform with their milk production on this new grain as compared to their old stuff, which we know it's going to take a couple of weeks to get them transitioned to the new feed, and then you got to give it kind of a couple weeks after they're on the new feed to kind of gauge how they're performing. So we'll probably check back with a progress report on the new feed.
Well, babe, you did it.
I did it. I mixed it.
How are you feeling about this?
So far I'm feeling pretty good because every goat has excitedly gone after it. So I'm very excited. Yay! Now it's time for Betsy to finish this tray of food and for us to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for joining me and nerding out with me. As always, this is your country nerd with a goat herd that has a new food saying that you can grow where you're planted.